My name is Matt, and today I'm going to be talking about on-call, y'all. How many people here are on call right now? Anyone? I knew someone would be. Okay, two. Well, that's good. Good for you. Um, so on-call is something that I've had a lot of experience with recently. I just worked 2 years at a company called Blameless. And Blameless is a company that makes a piece of software that helps you organize incidents. It is itself incident management software. So when I'm talking about Blameless here, you have to imagine that we're using our own software to do all of this stuff. I'm not actually going to talk about the Blameless software in the talk, but I am going to talk about how we used it. A little bit about me. I am a musician, and I try to work music into a lot of the things that I do. Here's some of my music if you're curious. And I have a big announcement. I just started as a site reliability architect at form.com. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I'm only 2 weeks in, so I'm really excited to start there and build their SRE practice and actually implement some of the stuff that I'm going to talk about today. So, about 6 sections of stuff here. I'm going to give you, the first half is going to be kind of some background, a little bit about Blameless's problem doing on-call, a little bit about the theory of on-call and improvisations, and then the second half, I'm actually going to show you the training, now not the full training because it's 8 hours of training, it's a distilled training of what I actually trained the folks at Blameless to do on call. If you were at DevOps Days LA yesterday and you saw Paige Cruz's excellent talk, this was a big part of it, and I wanted to put it in here because this is what's happening. I'm going to help you do this. And by doing so, we are going to examine it. First, like I said, Blameless is a platform for managing incidents. We had 40 plus microservices. So we're a small shop. That's a lot of microservices to manage. Some of these microservices were not owned. We had turnover, people leaving, people joining, getting into the code of the stuff that they wanted to get into, not necessarily the really old stuff. And so stuff just started to kind of accumulate age. Now, what we decided that we'd do is that we would break these services up. We would have specific owners. Teams would own services. And we would have ways to get to those teams. We would have a service matrix. So you could look at this matrix and see this is the service, this is what it's called, this is what it does in the UI, and this is the team that owns it. Incidents were confusing. Finding experts was very difficult. Dark debt, I mentioned there's a lot of turnover in startups sometimes, and that can leave behind things that tribal knowledge just kind of disappears. Complexity encroaches in, and then all of a sudden you're surprised by something that you didn't even know was there. That's what dark debt is like. Too much time fighting fires. This is probably starting to sound similar if you've been on call any time in your life. Now, every week at Blameless, we had this session called Practice of Practice Gamelan, which I'll talk about a little bit later. And in this session, we examined our work as done. We examined the things that we did every day. And here's a couple of things that we did to do that. A decision requirements table is a nice exercise to dig into our knowledge. And then we used knowledge elicitation games, and I'm going to show you one of those later, to help identify not only the gaps that we had, but also the things that were making us good. Those are the things that we wanted to emphasize. Hero culture. This was another big problem. Hero culture came about by several different ways, actually. It could be pride over the code. I told you, people would come in, and I only write Go code, so they didn't even look at the pile of Python we had over here. Heroes were the old-timers. They were the ones that knew where the bodies were buried. They were the ones that were also very quick to help people. So they were the ones that people would always go to. So this builds on itself, and this can build on people, and this can make silos of knowledge and islands of data. So we want to have collaborative sessions to try to get out of this. In these sessions, we build reciprocity. You get to know the people that you're with so that you feel okay calling them at 3 a.m. instead of thinking, oh, I'm calling someone who's a stranger at 3 a.m. I barely know this person. Now, clumsy handoffs were another problem here. By clumsy, I mean, well, sometimes they happen in Slack and sometimes they didn't. We tried to put a Slack workflow in. It was this thing, it came on at like 10 o'clock in the morning, and it said, okay, it's time for on-call handoff. Whoever's coming off, please talk to whoever's coming on. Hit the button, and the baton is passed. Well, people would just look into the channel and hit the button and not talk. You know, it's stuff like that. So we decided the thing that we needed to do was have a regular meeting every week. And we had to be a little, I don't want to say forceful, but this was a required meeting, and we really needed people to be there. And it's a really important meeting because handoffs are one of the ways that complexity can really bite you. So there was a leader in this meeting, and this leader would help synchronize the shifts, asked if there's anything going on, any blockers, anything that the new on-call needs to know for each of the teams that had service rotations. Now, sometimes the on-call was too busy. You know, sometimes the on-call is the first responder, and then they end up being the subject matter expert. And well, they're a tenured person at the company, so they're kind of a leader, and so they end up like managing the incident. And all of a sudden, this one person has 4 or 5 different roles inside the incident. How are they supposed to do all of that? So we decided that one thing we wanted to do was have a specific on-call rotation that was only incident commanders, so that if the responding on call, even if it was a minor severity, if they felt like they just couldn't handle facilitating the incident, and I'm talking about communications, you know, escalating, getting people to come help, then the IC on call needed to be contacted. And by the way, the IC on call was automatically contacted for major incidents. So severity, we used SEV, 0 was the top, and then 1 was another major, 2 and 3 were minor. And no shared understanding. So you get into an incident, it was inconsistent. How do we pick severity? Do you know how severe it is? Sometimes people would use severity in kind of a weaponized way. Oh, the VP of this customer is having a problem. Well, it's not a very major problem. It's just like they put their email in wrong. But the salesperson for that customer may declare the incident as a SEV 1. And so everyone freaks out because it's a SEV 1, but it's really, it might even be a customer configuration problem. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to have collaborative training so that everybody is on the same page about what we do. How do we choose a severity? What do we do about priority? And I'm going to show you a flowchart later that helps folks make that decision. So one of the things that I like to talk about a lot is improvisation. And I am a musician. I'm an improvising musician. But I'm not going to talk about music right away. There's this really cool paper that I really love, and it's called Collective Improvisation in Emergency Response. What we're looking at here is the shoreline in the Arctic, probably in Norway. It's a Norwegian flag over here on the side. And this paper examined the way that Arctic responders had to learn to improvise in a highly complex situation. So what I'm going to ask you to do here is to kind of translate here. Think about an Arctic rescue. Think about the kinds of things that they have to deal with. Seas, weather, animals, other boats, maybe other people. So there are all kinds of complexities that happen. There are even time constraints in Arctic rescue. It's really cold. You know, you can't be out in the cold that long as a human. So improvisation, practicing things under pressure was really important for these Arctic rescuers. What I'm showing here are actually conclusions from the paper that were verified through the study. So the thing that really stood out to me in this paper was that the training was a big part of it. I like to talk about bands that get together and improvise. Now, these bands, like jazz bands, sometimes they get together at the last minute and they like to have a show, but most of the time they're getting together iteratively, and they practice to practice together. They practice their practice of improvisation, and that's a version of collaborative training. Now, they did that in the Arctic by doing exercises out in the cold and whatever, different types of, real work, practicing that stuff. And musicians do this too. They go into a practice room and they practice scales and stuff, but when they're in a show, when those rescuers are out in the Arctic, or when we are responding to an incident in software, improvisation is adaptation. And I like to say it's adaptation in concert with change, because when we're in an incident, when we're in a performance, when we're in a rescue situation, things are changing all the time. And so we have to absorb that change, we have to keep our eyes open for what's changing, and we have to be able to adapt to it. So we build a language together. What does a language look like? In music, it's going to look like things like scales and chords and rhythms and instruments, the harmonies. When jazz musicians learn to play together, they learn to play jazz, and they're called heads in jazz. And it's just like the melody and a few chord changes. They learn that head, and now they're empowered to be able to improvise around that. These are the same types of things we do in software. We have these things, these networks and languages, the languages that we write and the languages that we use, that parlance, the code bases that we share and the tools that we share. We need to share these things so that we're ready to improvise, so that we don't have to think about these things. That's kind of the point, is that when you get into a situation where things are changing all the time, you don't have time to think. So what collaborative training looked like at Blameless, this is a picture of me, and something that we called the Wheel of Expertise. The Wheel of Expertise was spun, you landed on a spot, and then depending on whether you were an expert, if you were not an expert, maybe you were kind of an expert, you would share your screen and show us. Show the whole session. How would you figure out what the API, or if you landed on bot or email, what part of our system did that touch? So people would pull up the wiki, they'd pull up GitHub, they'd pull up the code. We'd have people share the code. Experts would show us, oh, you know this? And so the conversation goes into these deep crevices of our system. And we learn, we extract expertise. That's knowledge elicitation. The kinds of things that also happened in these collaborative training sessions is that we get to know each other. I mentioned building reciprocity before. That's really important when we're working together as a team. When we get to know each other, like I said, we feel a lot less put out when we have to call each other for help. And that's really important. The other thing that I like about shared sessions like this is that you will retain knowledge better when you learn it in a shared environment. It's really cool. You kind of like remember the people you're with, you remember the exercise, you remember the game, and that's why we like to do fun things, because that emphasizes that shared activity together. Here's one of the exercises that we do for collaborative training. I mentioned before that we had such a problem with severity. So one thing that we didn't want to do when we were changing this on-call program is we didn't want to change our severity definitions at the same time. So we had these severity definitions that were already in the wiki, and you had to read them, and it was really hard. You had to memorize it, basically, when you get into an incident to know what you're doing. So I created this flow chart over here. Where's the laser? There it is. And these are the severities down here, and you would just kind of pick your way through the flow chart. And we came up with this game to help us do this. So there's a site, I think it's called Roll Dice with Friends. And you go on Roll Dice with Friends, and we had this matrix of our services, kind of like the Wheel of Expertise. And then I would roll all 5 die. And then each dice would be one of these different things. And here's an example. So I rolled the die. A customer reported the problem. 4 customers were affected. 6 responders were involved with the incident. It happened at 12 p.m., that's noon, and to our ServiceNow integration. And it's a Sev1. The flow chart told me it's a Sev1. I didn't have to make a decision there. That's pretty cool. One of the other sessions that we had every week is incident story time. Now, incident story time is almost like an operational review. It was another session that we had during the week where, just like Practice of Practice Gamelan, the whole company is invited. And we would look at the Blameless application, we would pull up the week's incidents, and we would always want to pull up the incidents that were marked resolved, because this was basically the retrospective. Now, some of these incidents were larger, and those incidents would get their own retrospective. But even so, this was a really good meeting that multiple people came to, where you could give a summary of that retrospective. Well, what we did in this meeting is we talked stories. We really told each of our perspectives of the incident. Sidney Decker likes to talk about incidents as if the responder is inside a tunnel. The responder can't see outside the tunnel. And the people outside the tunnel cannot see inside the tunnel. So you have all these different responders who are inside their own little tunnels during an incident, and they're all doing their own little thing. So when we get to story time, we want to know the story of each of those tunnels, because if we can see inside the tunnels, we get a little bit deeper knowledge about what the incident was about and how we responded. Now, one thing that people ask me about in these kinds of meetings is what we do about follow-up items. And what I recommend is you note them, but don't talk about them. You really don't need to talk about them. In our arrangement here, remember we strongly divided our services into teams so that when these follow-up items came up, well, they belonged to a team or a set of teams because maybe those services were coupled in some way. Some of the other continuous learning and training that we did, so every single quarter, and you'll see some of this later, I ran incident command, on-call, and post-incident analysis training. And we did that every quarter. This is something, this on-call training, that a lot of places just don't do. I did an informal survey, and I was surprised at how many answers I got where companies are not training their employees on how to do on-call. They're not even training their employees on how to set up their on-call, and that's really important. IR Monthly was a monthly meeting, and it was a retrospective on the process itself. So we made some decisions that ended up being not so great decisions, and we used IR Monthly to look into those and introspect into the program that we were designing. A good example of something that came up on IR Monthly was in that incident command rotation, we had some people put on the IC rotation that were not taken off their engineer rotation. And so all of a sudden, one shift, someone was IC and primary on-call for their team. Now, we actually didn't have any incidents, I don't think, that hit those 2 particular holes in the Swiss cheese, but we decided this can't happen. We can't have someone who will be put in the situation we tried to fix, which is responding trying to be the subject matter expert and facilitating. We don't want that. So we use Slack. We were a fully distributed company, so it was really important that we had areas in Slack to be able to be in to talk about these things, talk about learning from incidents and the cognition challenges we have during incidents, talk about our work as done, the thing that we actually do when we're doing our work. And we also had a read club, kind of like a book club, except that we would do shorter things. So book clubs, of course, tend to be books, and you do a chapter, and it takes forever. In the Read Club, we did it every month, and we would just look at, like, oh, we did a paper. We did the Common Ground paper, which is a famous paper about common ground and joint activity. We did a great ACM article by Laura McGuire that I'm going to talk a little bit about in a minute. But before I get to kind of the high-level view of this training, kind of the greatest hits of this training, I want to take a moment to point out that this program, this resuscitation that we did, was one of the most, if not the most successful transformation programs that Blameless had in its history. And it worked really well for people. But that said, there is no such thing as a best practice. What I'm about to show you worked for our team because we introspected what we needed. You may take some of these things, some of these tactics back to your own teams, and they may work, or they may not work, because the people are different. So just, remember that. Incident roles. So I'd like to start off talking about incident roles with this diagram. This is a mandala. This is actually a sand mandala. It's made out of sand. And the cool thing about the mandala is that it has this shape that's a circle, obviously, but it has this center point. So mandala always has a center. And the center represents the awareness. Okay? And everything around the center, the center itself is the attention that we are doing. I have attention to this presentation, and the world is, I'm aware of the world around me. When there's an incident happening, those problem solvers have attention on what they are doing, but they still need to keep that mandala of awareness around them. So to do that, we talk about the response trio, and that's 3 things that an incident always has. And that's going to be a commander, a facilitator, there's going to be a problem solver, and there's going to be a communicator, and it may be the same person. So as incidents get more severe, and as you need to break out your team into different people, it's not just one person responding, different people take on these roles. And what this signifies here is something called adaptive choreography. This is something that Laura McGuire talks about in this ACMQ article. I have references at the end of the slides if you want them, and I'll make the slides available. So adaptive choreography is described by the command being like loosely coupled, if you can think about it that way. So we have problem solvers down here, and they have that little clover leaf of arrows around them, and that means that they're working locally. They're making local decisions. They're being flexible about what they need to do. They are the ones that know what's going on there at the sharp end. So we need those people to make those decisions. The incident commander sort of keeps track of them, does not micromanage them, does not tell them what to do, does not make decisions for them. Now, the incident commander may help them make decisions because the incident commander can see a wider view than the problem solvers can. They're looking at the sharp end, the incident commander is looking more broadly. And then the communication lead, they're over there on the side, and they've got strong connections to stakeholders, C-level people, the customer, things like that, maybe the sales, maybe CS. Sometimes customer service is the communications role. So quickly, I want to go through And when we're doing the trainings, I'd like to go through each of these separately, and each of these actually explode out into their own mini little slide in the trainings, but I'm just going to go through this in a summary way. The most important thing about this slide, though, is the bottom. The command owns the response, not the problem. The problem solvers own the problem. Command needs to let those people solve the problem. And when I say people, it could be teams of people, right? It could be a huge incident. But the command needs to own the response because the command needs to be able to take on those aspects of the incident that are too complicated or too complex for one person to deal with while they're doing something else. Supporting common ground is really important. I have a slide on that later. Communications lead is, I talked about it a little bit, Communications lead, there we go, is the role that talks to people. This is the role that's reaching out to customers, reaching out to the stakeholders. One of the things that sometimes you can have in an incident is a dedicated scribe. Sometimes the communication lead can take on that responsibility. Sometimes the IC can take on that responsibility. But the thing to remember is that if they can't, give it to someone else, especially if you have a really complicated incident where you've got side meetings, maybe there are Slack threads going on in the main incident channel. If you even have an incident channel, something that I recommend you do. There may be Zoom calls going on. There may be Hangouts going on. Whatever you do, WebEx, anything like that. If you're worried about, and really you should be, getting the data from those meetings so that everyone in the incident knows what's going on, assign a scribe to the meeting. Or if you're the IC, be the scribe if you can. So problem solvers, obviously, we're all problem solvers. One of the hardest things, actually, I've seen that some incident commanders deal with is not being the problem solver, is to pull themselves out of being the problem solver. Don't go look for observability. Delegate that. Check in with the delegate to make sure that you get the answer back, but let someone else do that so that you as the IC can help other people. I'm going to go over the OODA loop in just a few seconds. I love OODA looping because it's a great way to kind of give people a guide. Because sometimes when you get in an incident, you don't know what to do. And the OODA loop is a great guide to do that. Now, incidents. One thing that I like, any cubers in here? Cubers, anyone like speed cubing? I love the Rubik's Cube. Oh, yes, the New Relic had their Rubik's Cube swag. Do they still have any? Oh, cool. All right, well, go grab some Rubik's Cubes. I have my own speed cube here. The interesting thing about cube puzzles is that they're complicated. They're not complex if you just sit it there. I could leave this on this podium for a month and come back and it'll still look the same if no one picked it up and solved it. So it's complicated, but it's not complex. I like speed cubing because it's complex. Time has become an element of what's going on. We have to do it as fast as possible. I can do it in a little under a minute. I'm not going to do that right now. But it adds this element of time. It adds this element of pressure. And that's why I really like to use it as kind of a symbol of complexity. And that's why it's on the slide, because incidents are complex. And when you get into an incident, you don't want to then get your stuff working. Another one of the problems that I didn't really show up here was that we had people that didn't set up their PagerDuty. They just weren't onboarded. I don't know why. Maybe they just missed that part of their onboarding. Maybe their manager neglected to tell. I don't know. It wasn't delineated, though, in our onboarding process that they needed to do this. So we created a section in the wiki that was step by step. Go to PagerDuty, set this up, enter your phone number. You must set up your escalation in PagerDuty. By the way, if you don't know, there is no default escalation in PagerDuty. You must set it up. So we would have people that would go onto their on-call shift, They didn't know this. They just left their default PagerDuty escalation in there, and we couldn't get a hold of them. So we made sure that that was in the wiki. Another thing that we put in the wiki was an easy way to get to observability. We had a lot of different observability platforms, and I don't say it was a mess because we were unifying on one platform, but we had some of our logs on the other one still, and then that isn't where the database metrics were, and that isn't where the security stuff was, and that, we had to get on directly onto the RabbitMQ dashboard to see those and it was kind of confusing, so we put all that into one place in one cheat sheet so that everyone had the same jumping off point. The other thing that I showed you a little bit in that exercise earlier was that declaration flowchart, and this was a big help to a lot of people because if you're like me, you are a visual thinker, and when I see a wall of text, and I apologize that I'm showing walls of text, I realize that, but when I'm dealing with an incident, I don't want to read. I really don't. I want to look at that flow chart and I want to figure it out. I know this, this, and this. Okay, Sev 2. Now, when you're incident command, there's a few things that I wanted to point out here. And I just think that this is really important to understand because when we say we're sustaining common ground, it's not just the incident command's job. It's everybody's job. So even though the incident command is sort of the person who keeps this in mind because problem solvers are doing stuff, everyone needs to be doing this. So listen, get perspectives from different people. Get diverse perspectives. It's always better to make decisions with good information than to make a fast decision. When you hear new things, when you get a new status, when someone says, we finished a mitigation or we're going to start another one, update the other people. If you have people joining the incident anew, maybe you had to replace someone, maybe you had to escalate and bring someone in, maybe the incident is getting more and more severe, more and more teams are joining the incident channel, update those people. Now, even in Blameless, the application, we did have a little summary that would pop up, but even though it does have good information, don't always trust those kinds of summaries. Double check that you're getting the right kind of information because the time between that summary got written and the time that you joined the channel, other stuff could have happened, and it's pretty likely that it did. So once you are updating, you can guide people with those decisions, suggest alternatives. If people seem to be stuck, try to get things moving by asking them questions. Sometimes a junior SRE will get a little bit timid and not really make the decision. They may know the decision that they need to make, but they're going to be a little timid to make it because of the production pressure. The eyes are on them. As I see, as a leader, as another SME on the response team, help them make that decision. Give them some motivation to make it. And then monitor for failings in common ground. How do you do that? Well, people start asking questions. Did so-and-so already do this? That's a good sign that common ground is being lost. Did we do this or did we do this? Oh, a bunch of people just disappeared into a thread. Or the Zoom call's been going on for 20 minutes and no one's given an update to the channel. Does anyone know what's going on? These are all signs that common ground is failing. You want to avoid a situation where you get to a coordination surprise, where one team has gone down one way, another team has gone down the other way. They think that they're working in the same direction, but then they both get to two separate conclusions, and they reach this coordination surprise. They have to stop. They have to recalibrate. And guess what? The incident isn't waiting. It's still going. So what do you do when you monitor and you see these things? You can try to repair them. You can, like I said, ask questions, get the conversation going. You can even just say, okay, everyone stop. I realize that we're in a bad place, the incident's still going, but we don't know what we're doing. So everyone put your pencils down, whatever, close your laptops, and we're going to talk about what's happening. We're going to resync, we're going to recalibrate. That's okay. Get people breaks. When you've seen people who have been working on incidents for 8 and 9 hours, that's too long. Ask them how they're doing. Have they eaten? You know? When's the last time did they sleep? Is there someone that can replace them? This is why these at channel, at here, call to arms, everyone dogpile on the incident. That's bad in these situations because now everyone's burnt out. We don't have any replacements. I've been at places where we actually strongly told a certain subset of people, you are not allowed to work on the incident because we need you in the morning. So go to bed and we'll see you in the morning. And we're going to work on the incident overnight. Okay, let's talk about the OODA loop. So the OODA loop is kind of your compass. Let me put it that way. OODA loops, OODA loops don't happen just once. They happen multiple times. And they may be happening in layers. Just like the joint activities that are going on during the incident. We're talking to customer service. We're talking to the people who are responding. We're talking to stakeholders or whatever. This is a way for us to be able to kind of all get together in sync. So we enter the OODA loop with the observe phase. And in the observation phase, this is where the incident starts. We're assessing what's going on. We're trying to figure out, do we have some external views of what's going on? You know, is it a gray failure? Is it a customer reported problem that we have no internal monitoring on yet? Try to assess the context of what's going on. Evaluate scope and severity at this moment. Now, we had that flow chart that helped us. So that's sometimes a really helpful thing in these fast-paced incidents is to be able to have these graphical things to look at. Now next, after you've observed, now you're in the loop strongly. You've got to orient yourself. This is where you're checking common ground. Okay, we've seen a new thing happen, or we're entering a new phase of our joint activity. Let's make sure that we've updated what's going on. Everyone know that this mitigation went out. Everyone know that it didn't work, and we have so and so and so looking at this, and we're going to look over here. And so let's keep going. Let's see if we can identify what we need to do next. So when we decide, like I said before, get diverse perspectives. Prefer informed decisions over rapid ones. This is where you can pull in more of your observability evidence and see, well, if we want to go that way, look at this, we may have to consider that. If we make this decision, we have to consider this. This is that point where you're trying to make these smart decisions in the middle of an incident. And sometimes you won't be able to make a smart decision. You're just going to have to make a decision. When you make your decision and you're ready to go and you're ready to act, this is where you're delegating the actions and you're updating each other. You go away, you do a mitigation, and you come back. And keep those mitigations simple, by the way. Don't tell, okay, you 5 people go do 5 mitigations. We'll see which one works. That's not what you want to do. You want to do things one at a time. Keep repairs simple so that when you make a repair, you don't have other repairs that may have fixed it, but which one of these fixed it? Well, I'm not really sure. Maybe we should have done one at a time. Use closed loop communication when you're acting. Closed loop communication is when you answer the person asking you a question with an affirmation that you have received that information, you're acknowledging that you received it, and you're going to go do something. So when the incident commander tells someone, Matt, I need you to go kill all the processes on this database, I don't just silently go do it. I say, yes, Julie, I hear you. I'm going to go do this. I'm going to do it on these 2 databases. I'll talk to you in 10 minutes when I'm done. That's closed loop communication. So post-incident's a pretty confusing place. It often looks like this. It looks like a mess because we've pulled out something, we've opened this, we've kind of dropped the floor on that. You know, people are over here and over there and over there. We've made a lot of notes. We haven't made a lot of documentation. Maybe we haven't updated the ticket. Maybe in Blameless, there's a certain function where you can highlight certain aspects of the Slack channel, and it'll get put into your event line in the Blameless application. Those kinds of things all get missed. They get messed up. We have to go back and do them. Hey, did anyone check that the actual customer impact time actually matched the customer impact time? It's a big mess at the end. So in addition to kind of a checklist that was very, very specific to our operation of make sure that this is done and this is done and this is checked and roles are done, and make sure, the customer, like tagging, make sure the customer's tagged, make sure the service is tagged. We also wanted to help people with their written analysis, because this is the part where people tend to go, well, the incident's over, right? We're done. We can just leave. Well, the incident isn't over. It's kind of hard to tell when an incident is actually over. Well, maybe the problem is over, but addressing the problem is not over. We still need this post-incident. We still need some kind of analysis because we're really interested in learning how we responded. We're less interested in learning who did something wrong. We want to know, how did we respond to this problem? Will we be able to respond the same way in the future? So I encourage, do an incident analysis for everything. It doesn't have to be deep. If you have a Sev 3, use this template, and I'll share the template, just a couple slides. Use this template and write something simple, because when you do that for a minor incident, and you start learning little things in the minor incident, you're going to be ready for the major one. Writing that major incident write-up is not going to look as daunting if you've already practiced with some little incidents. So I really encouraged everyone to just write it. Compliance like this too. They really likes this. If you can do it that way, they don't have to say, well, we need a written analysis for all major incidents. You don't have to do that. You just write something for everything. And give yourself time to do it. This isn't free work. This isn't after-hours work. This isn't homework. This is part of the incident. Something that I really like to drive home with incident response, it's part of our jobs. Those Arctic rescuers, it's funny, they're not doing like software development. So when they're not doing Arctic rescue, they're spending a lot of that time practicing. A lot of that time practicing. Firefighters do this too. A majority of the time that they're not actually responding, they're practicing. Now, when we are not responding, in operations, we do a lot more practicing, but in development, you don't have that luxury. Try to build it in. This practice session that we had every week, we encourage people all over the company to come in. Developers, operators, we even had technical writers and people from the marketing and the sales team come to that session and learn more about their coworkers in the technology side of things, get empathy for them. It was really cool, but it's part of your job. Doing this written analysis is part of your job. Don't rush through it. Give yourself an hour, just an hour. If it's a small one, it won't take that long. If it's a big one, you may need more time, but just set aside some time and time box it. That'll help. And then use this template that I'll share in a minute. And this will give you, as a bare minimum, some just starting points of where you can go. And then sometimes a more extensive write-up is required. Sometimes when we want to do a learning from incidents style learning review for an incident, we will do something like the Jelly Howie Guide, which is a great way to look at how we operated during the incident, more so than what happened. So let me share with you the template that we use. This is the actual template in our software that our team used. So the software doesn't have this template. The software just has a place to put a template. So this is the template that we put for our team. Give a narrative or a summary. So this summary is like the back of a book. It's like reading the back of a paper book or a paperback when you're in a bookstore and you want to get an idea of the book. That's what the narrative summary is about. And I like telling people, write this in present tense, as if you're telling a story. That way it kind of engages the reader. They're kind of like, they feel like they're reading a story instead of an account. Leave the details out of that summary or narrative. We have a section here for providing the technical overview, and this is where you're getting down to brass tacks, all the things that happened, what you discovered, what the defects were, what the mitigation steps were taken, how long did those take, and the teams involved, all of these little infinite details of the incident that you can find. And you will not find all of them, but that you can find. And as always, we want to know what the customer impact is. Even if a customer didn't report the problem, we want to know what the customer impact is. If we have some kind of bug in the UI that we discover because we are using our platform, and we discover that we need to create an incident about it, the customer impact, because we're customer zero, is something that we need to note. And then lastly, on the template, we had this identify themes section. And this is the qualitative data. This is, what those people were reporting when you asked how long they were working. This is stuff like, did we have to work all night? Was there a team that was engaged for a certain amount of time? Did we have coordination problems? Did we have tooling problems? Did we have successes? Did a junior SRE do something great and learn a new tool during the incident? These kinds of things are important to understand how we work as a team. And how we work as a team builds right into how we respond to things like incidents. Now, finally, when we're responding to incidents and when we're doing post-incident work, we like to be blame aware, and we like to employ systems thinking about what we're doing. When we use words like human error, I'm sorry, I should put quotes around that, human error, or root cause, those are just like blame. They're mechanistic ways for us to try and decode a very complicated or complex situation. We want that simple explanation. We want that simple thing to go to and point at, and we're able to point to it and say, there's the blame, there's the root cause, there's the human error. Well, I have news for you. Software in this day and age is extremely complex. We're lucky that we don't have to point at causes. We don't have to worry about instinctual survival. We don't have to think, oh, I need the simplest thing so that I can escape. Well, maybe you do. But when we really want to figure out what's going on with our systems, we want to look at the system. And we want to look at the failures and the successes of the system. We want to recognize that we may have that ping of like, oh, blame, root cause. Well, that's okay. I'm telling you it's okay. You will hear people say, don't use blame, don't use root cause. It's hard to just change your language like that. Move through it. It's okay to say, oh, the root cause is right there. Okay, well, that's cool. Well, let's look at the other things that may have led to that. How did that get there? So if emotions, and this is what they are, they're reactions to emotions that lead you to say things like, I blame this, or I'm attributing root cause to this. That's just a way for your brain to go, that's really interesting. That's really cool. I'm highlighting this for you, human. You should dig deeper at that point. That's what blame and root cause, that's what they are. So when you are trying to reboot your own on-call program, or you're trying to build a new one, like I am at Form, or you're having problems and you need to kind of reach in and figure out what's going on, where are we doing things wrong, ask yourself, what's difficult about on-call? Really ask yourself, what's difficult about what I'm doing? What are the most difficult decisions that we have to make as a team? while we're on call. And that'll start to give you insight into how your team is succeeding and where you can fill in those gaps and improve. Thank you. I do have references here. I will share the slides. I don't know if Scale does slide sharing anywhere. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Does anyone have any questions?
So, what you're describing sounds like it takes a lot of people. Currently, there's, a bit of a layoff problem in tech.
Mm-hmm.
So, how do you go about convincing higher-ups that it's important to not constantly burn your people out, and that maybe you shouldn't rely solely on on-call and, like people being woken up at all odd hours of the night? Like, how do you get enough people to implement this vision?
That's a good question, because you're right. People are a constraint. Teams are constrained by the expertise that they have on the team. Being able to assign these roles during an incident, being able to, kind of fan your team out so where you can have individuals do all of these different roles, it does take people. So this is difficult. It's difficult to show leaders that there is ROI, return on investment, in people in incidents, because it looks like you're buying insurance. It looks like, well, what if we don't have any incidents? Well, I don't want to spend this money on hiring these people if we're not going to have any incidents, so let's just not have any incidents. Well, we all know that doesn't happen. The incidents are going to be there regardless. And in fact, with cloud, incidents can happen anywhere, and we may not know it. We may not have any control over it. So the conversation to have is really about how prepared are we to adapt? How can we help our people learn what we're doing and make it about the people? I think that when you make it about the people, it becomes obvious that this person is burnt out and we need to replace them, or we need to help them. We need to grow this team. When teams are constrained with things like layoffs, the poor people at Twitter that are getting called for things that they have no expertise about. That's a good example of like, well, what do we do? The thing to do is to look at what you need to do right now. Look at what's going on with the incident, and then track what's going on, track those troubles like I've been describing, take that back to leadership and go, look at all the problems we had responding to this incident. Not what the incident was about. We're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about all the problems we had waking people up. These people didn't, and hopefully that'll help people see the light and know that this takes people. Right down here. Question in the front.
So in smaller organizations, it's easier to kind of pull the engineering side of the group into a room to kind of do this knowledge sharing. But as they grow, information gets siloed, and what are good ways to communicate the results of some of these on-call investigations across a larger organization where you might have hundreds, if not thousands, of engineers that you can't just be like, hey, everybody, let's do a quick lunch and learn, this afternoon.
Right. One of the ways will be the written write-up, actually. Because you can't get everyone into one meeting. You may be a global team, for example, and it's just impossible. You can't get everyone into one meeting. You can't just talk to people face-to-face all the time. So that written write-up does help. One of the challenges is how to get people to read it. Yeah, I've even thought, you know what, I should make like shorts of video, like a video short of, like an encapsulation of what happened in the incident. Would people watch that? I don't know. But that is one of the problems, is getting people to read those, and that's why it's kind of important if you're doing a lot of writing of these incident reports, make it interesting, make it first person, make it a story so that people are like engaged in it, and all of a sudden they're like, wow, this is kind of I want to know what happens at the end,
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
I think we've all known that there's people that are better head down problem solvers, and there's people that are better at the incident command part of the job.
Mm-hmm.
If you need to pull from that same sort of pool of people for those two roles, how do you decide to do a rotation, or how do you pick who is going to take which particular spot in that incident?
That's a good question, and that's something that we had to deal with when we were separating those two on-call teams. And one of the things that I talked a lot about to upper management when we were discussing this decision was that we needed to train people, and we couldn't just put anybody on the incident command rotation. It wasn't, incident command is not, you're right, it's not the kind of thing that everybody can do. Facilitation can be a very complicated task, and it's not for everybody. So we didn't necessarily tell people they had to be on the IC rotation. Engineering managers filled the IC rotation at first because we needed to fill it, because we wanted to get that done. And the engineering managers in the company tended to do that role already. So they were used to and stepped in to do that. And then it was volunteer. For the engineers that, well, I kind of want to do facilitation. I want to do IC. I'd like to be on that rotation. That would be an approval process. I think on most teams, whether or not you're a service team doing service on call or an SRE team, if it's in your job description to be on call, you're thinking about that engineering on call, and you're ready for that, and that's going to be part of your job. So the IC on call. Volunteer is not a great word, I think, because it's still your job. It's not like you're volunteering to do something else. But yes, I don't want to be on engineering on call. I want to be on the facilitator on call. That was an important distinction. Yeah.
I have one for you. So
Okay, great.
let's say you come from a really mature ITIL organization, and you've come to another firm, not necessarily a small firm, maybe a smaller department in a big firm, and they're not really all that serious. They don't necessarily distinguish that much between incidents and requests.
Mm.
And they have change management. It's change management light, and they don't want to commit to SLAs because it's kind of it's the culture of the group that you're in.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So how do you deal with the chaos and tension that sometimes occurs in that environment when they say you absolutely cannot start codifying these things that you want to?
Right. I'm glad you said ITIL, because that's a good example of a framework that has been around a long time, and a lot of people. What is ITIL? Oh, ITIL. Can you please? I don't know the acronym off the top of my head.
So it's I'm
You know what?
But
I'll tell you what it is. ITIL is hierarchical management of resources. Okay? So what happens in ITIL is that you've got a commander, and they're micromanaging all the way down. So ITIL only lets you do things in certain ways, in specific contexts. There's no flexibility. Okay? So when we're talking about people who are kind of steeped in that ITIL tradition, they really are leaning on that structure. They may be a little bit OCD about that structure. They kind of think that Well, the solution to things that we don't understand is to build a structure around it. This kind of stuff, when we're talking about software complexity, and I think we're already seeing this in SRE, is that we realize that this hierarchical way of looking at our systems just doesn't work. Because when you get down into the sharp end, things are so flexible and so complex and changing all the time that you'll see a success with a program like this, with an learning from incidents type of approach, and you learn things, and all of a sudden, you're sort of leaving the ITIL people behind, because the people who are coming into this new way of thinking are learning more, and they look like they're having more fun. You know, that. At least I hope that's kind of what happens.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
I'm sorry we're just running short on time, but if you talk to me after, I'll explain it to you. So
Yeah.
it's right around that time.
Good question, because that's sometimes a lot of the things that people have to deal with is how do we go from one to the other?
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks, everybody.